there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. And ever since I came out with those artifact videos, I've probably had like 100 or 150 comments across like the forums and my YouTube comment section about what are the best artifacts, like what artifacts should I level, like what are the best ones, what are the best ones for healer, what are the best ones for DPS, what are the best ones, etc. Which I understand. It's just that it's not an easy question to answer. It's got a lot of different parts to it. So let's kind of jump into that here. So first I'm going to show you kind of a summary here, because it breaks down into three different categories, three different columns between ones that are worth it, ones that are kind of worth it, and ones that are definitely aren't worth it. So let's kind of get into that here, and then we'll show some examples later on. Okay, so like I said, the artifacts fall into basically three categories. So we got 22 artifacts. These are all the artifacts that are on test server right now that are changing to rank 200. They're separated between it's an actual worth it, the 200 rank, like is it worth it to put the 1 mil XP into? It's kind of worth it, and it's trash, it's just stats basically. So these are the three different categories. So we'll kind of address it here, kind of briefly go through it, and then I'll jump into the game and kind of show some more kind of comparisons. But in terms of what are the best like if you're a DPS and say, what are the three artifacts I should run? There is no simple answer to that. It's very dependent on not only your play style, but your power set as well. So what I mean by that is the example I'll show is, obviously, if you're a power set that doesn't use heat vision, then there's no point in using Soul Amplifier. The Soul Amplifier, you get 895 extra might, and it's 5% might as well on top of that. But the Philosopher's Stone has the same might. So you lose about 300 might, which I'll show in my video clip as well. But the Philosopher's Stone is like the Gemini, it's 4% of all stats. So the Soul Amplifier is 5%, but this Philosopher's Stone is 4%, but it has the same base might. So if you're not running heat vision and you're just using Soul Amplifier for the might, then there's no point to run it. You might as well run the Philosopher's Stone at 200 and get all the advantages of the supply drop buffs. So, but if you're using, if you're nature or pretty much a lot of the single target might builds, then obviously you need Soul Amplifier for heat vision. You can't get away around that, so then you have to still have that. But is it worth it to put 1 million XP just for in power channeling, which I can count on my one hand the number of times it's actually useful? Specific raids like SGE, it's helpful because you've got that stupid lightning strike that comes purple lightning strike that comes up and strikes half the map. Yeah, it's gonna knock you out heat vision. So, but very rarely does stuff like that happen in raids. I think that's the only example that I've seen where you get knocked out of heat vision, or it can still happen, but it's very rare. But is it worth 1 million XP to have in power channeling and then 900 might? I personally don't think so. I think it's perfectly fine at 160. Unless you've got a whole bunch of extra XP, but you need the Soul Amplifier regardless because you need it for single target. So you still have to have it at 160. Is it just not necessarily worth 1 million XP to get it to 200? So there's only 6 artifacts in the game that you should have, well, depending on your role, but the ones that are actually worth it to 200. Like if you have these artifacts and you use it, and you're like a tank or a DPS, whatever, controller, and you want to use it, then these you should get to 200 because it's worth it. So Eye of the Gemini, obviously, not only do you get the Gemini proc on it, but the new bonuses at 200 is Standing in Pollux Gaze grants you 5% might, prec, and vit. So the thing to remember here is that it's anyone. So that means any DPS in the entire game or controller. Not too many controllers run the Gemini, but still any DPS or controller that runs Gemini at 140, 160, 180, or 200 rank, you get 5% prec, vit, and might. That's what that stands for, standing in any Pollux Gaze. So the other person doesn't have to have a 200 Gemini for that to work. He just has to have Pollux Gaze, and you get Pollux Gaze at rank 140, 160, 180, and 200. So that's why Gemini is definitely worth it at 200. But you do give up a lot of might because Gemini has no base might, which I'll show in the clips as well. So if you want to focus on might build and you're not using a supercharge as often, then you may want to reconsider that. Power sets like Rage. If you have an amazing 50%er, you're going to be using it anyway, like Rage, Earth, Nature, Electric, and then even power sets like Gadgets or like Munitions is kind of on the border, but a lot of people use like the 2500 supercharge, like Gadgets will be using like Speed Drain, so they can kind of consistently get that out. So once again, it's worth it nonetheless. The second artifact, Scrap the Soul Cloak. Once again, that depends on your build. If you're like Earth Rage, like I said, Earth Rage, Nature, Electric, and you're constantly putting out supercharges, then that's 100% absolutely necessary to have the Soul Cloak at 200, because you not only get the Soul Cloak benefits, but you get 7% extra supercharge back, which allows you to run a better chess mod. If you're not a power set that uses like supercharge a lot, like say like Quantum has the hundreds, even if you're using a 2500% supercharge with the head mod, you can get that back. Like you don't necessarily need Soul Cloak because it's only a 2500 supercharge. You can earn that back, so you don't necessarily need it. But if you're a power set that uses your supercharge frequently, then you need this combo of Gemini and Soul Cloak. The Dead King Scepter, that's a playstyle thing. It's definitely worth it to have it 200. The orbital assistance procs every 20 seconds after an orbital strike. This is based on your might, so if you're precision DPS, Dead King Scepter is pointless because the orbital procs damage is based on might. So yes, you tank your might stats, which I'll show, but orbital assistance procs every 20 seconds. After an orbital, it procs every few seconds and has a 50% chance to proc. So it's great on single target. I wouldn't necessarily use this on AoE because the orbital assistance damage is strictly single target. But for a single target boss fight, that's a very handy artifact, because not only do you get like all your artifacts, or not all your trinkets, shorter cooldown, but you also get the extra orbital damage, and you get this orbital assistance. So the Claw, once again, that's a playstyle thing. If you're a controller that wants to go more of like a buff controller build, you 100% need the Claw of Alkund. 5% critical chance and magnitude on all rolls. So if you're a healer, if you're a tank, like a healer would get the critical heal chance and critical heal magnitude. Tank would get the... tank's not so much. Depends on what tank is. But like fire would be super helpful. Like obviously controllers, you get the critical power chance and critical power magnitude. DPS, you get all the critical ability and critical attack. So it helps precision DPS because their weapon crits and their power damage crits get increased. So this is an amazing buff to have at 200. It just depends if you're a controller that wants to focus on that kind of, not so much a battle troll build, but like a buff troll build. So if you're a controller running like the Claw, running the Tetra or the Cog, because that works in controller stance now, that's completely up to you. Philosopher's Stone, that's another one that's kind of on the bridge. Most people probably don't have this level because it sucked before, but it's technically worth it at 200. Your supply drop is doubled from 8 seconds to 16 seconds. So you get the 20% damage, health regen, and power free casting for that entire 16 seconds. And then every power that you hit with a 0.5 second cooldown. What that means is that if you clip a power, only one power counts. Or if you do like weapon tap, stuff like that. So that's why they have that internal cooldown. But the cooldown is lowered by 6 seconds. So that turns into your supply drop down from 5 minutes to about 3 minutes and 20 seconds, 3 minutes 30 seconds. So that's still like a nice jump. And then if you're a tank, 100% need the Manacles of Force. When Manacles procs, the cooldown for your tank primary shield is reset. So these 6 artifacts are the ones that are actually worth it to 200. So if you use any of these artifacts right now, 100% get them to 200. In terms of the ones that are okay, I mean, Lazarus Pit Water is more of like a niche. So the 15-minute res timer, whatever, like that's not necessary, but 15 minutes is pretty powerful, that's for sure. The Orb, you get an extra 3 seconds from 9 to 12 and resist CC, which, once again, meh, but there's no other really good healer artifacts. So once again, if you like using the Orb, that's a playstyle thing. If you like it as a healer, then it might be worth it. Soul Amplifier, like I was saying. Venomous Dispenser still is absolutely necessary for any Prec build. So if you want to be a precision DPS still after the revamp, or it's not the revamp, but after the weapons revamp or this DLC, you still need the Venomous Dispenser. You do get it free at 200, so that's fine. The Refractor, once again, you don't get much increase in percentages. I think it goes from like 18 something to like 19 something percent, the DOM increase, but it's 50% more effective up from 30. So not necessary, but it is kind of handy. At least it's not compared to these trash ones. So let's kind of jump into the trash ones. So we got Amulet of Ra. Once again, it's 1% extra debuff. So Amulet of Ra 160, you get a 14% attack and defense debuff. And now at 200, which is 1,000,000 XP, you get 15%. So you only get 1% extra on your debuffs for 1,000,000 XP. Personally, to me, that's not worth it. I would much rather like play around with like a battle troll build, because this would be more helpful for the group, the Claw and all these buffs, than like an Amulet would. Oops. Like if you got your amulet at 160 already, that's perfectly fine. That's what I mean by this. It's not like these are garbage artifacts. It just means that it's not worth it to get to 200. So same thing. Power Sight, Power Harness, just minuscule increase in percentage of stats. If it's at 160, it's fine. The Grim, once again, depending on your power set, you need the Grim anyway for like the PI setup, like Ice, Quantum, stuff like this. You would still need to run the Grim. So it's not like you can't just like take off the Grim, put the Philosopher's Stone on, because it's going to be, even though the stone is good, you're still going to lose massive damage from the Grim PI setup and the pet damage. It's just that the Grim, the 200 rank, the pet power reduction, you'll never see that in anything except parsing. In a solo, a duo, alert, a raid, you'll never notice this. It's only going to be for parsing. The positive is that you get 5% prec at 180 and 5% might at 200. So it's still a good artifact to get to 200 just for the stats. That's what I mean. Like it's basically just for stats. But you'll still be using it regardless. So this is one of the ones where don't rush to get it to 200, but if you use it, then just kind of dump your extra XP into it. Cog, definitely, it's not worth it to get to 200 unless you're like mega money. Like if you're made of money, then sure, get the Cog to 200 for your Prec DPS or like a buff troll, but it's barely any percentage of an increase. Same thing with the Tetra. If you've got the Tetra at 160, it's fine. Just keep it there. Demon Fang, once again, I couldn't even notice the difference. I'm going to do a video breaking down the Demon Fang for a battle healer build, but once again, not necessary to get to 200. The Mystic, it's 15% defense up to 20% defense. You're not going to notice that. You were surviving just fine with 15% defense. Plus on boss fights, it's not going to matter because you're not going to have enough adds to proc the full 20. Sparring AI, once again, tiny increase in the percentages. Rings of Azar, once again, tiny. You shouldn't really have this anyway unless you're really trying to maximize a buff troll build. Starheart sucks, always sucks. The Mega sucks too. So let's kind of jump in the game and kind of give you a better look at the artifacts here. Okay, so I wanted to show some examples. So basically what I was talking about where in terms of might. So if you're a typical player, you probably have Gemini, Circles, like say as an electric DPS. I'm electric. I'm going to be running, let's go back here. I'm going to have the Gemini and Soul Cloak in here because, Circuit Breaker spam is great. But in terms of like another artifact, electric doesn't need the Grim. So let's say I run the Dead King, like I'm doing like a single target boss fight, something like that. So because the Gemini has 0 base might, so it's innate stats, but I still get the 4% buff. Soul Cloak has low stats because it's not really a might artifact. It's only got 765 and it's got 3% might buff. The Dead King, same thing, 765. It's the same as Soul Cloak, and it's got 3%. So with these 3 artifact combinations, I'm at 48,349 might. So 48. So if I wanted to go to like a might build where I'm not going to worry about my supercharges, I'm still going to use supercharges. I'm just not going to worry about running Gemini. So if I run the Solar and I run the Stone and I run the Grim. So basically, the Solar Amplifier is already 5% might at 160, but you get 1785 might, which is like that increase. What I think is 895 from the spread from that document there. The Stone has the highest base stats out of any artifact. So you see like the 1,115 prec, 1785 might, and it's got 4% might buff already, which is pretty good. The Grim turns into 5% prec at 180 and 5% might at 200. So with these 3 artifacts, I'm at 53,000 might. And I was 48 before. So that's almost 5,000 might difference. 5,000 might. So you got to think about it. Is 5,000 might loss worth like extra supercharges? Like that's what you kind of have to ask yourself. So that's why like the Dead King is nice, but you lose so many base stats on your might, then makes it not so much worth it. Like that's why it's tricky to answer that. It does some nice damage on a single target. You obviously get all your trinkets faster. You get your extra orbital damage, but you give up like a ton of might, which like 5,000 is nothing to shake your head at. Like usually it's like, yeah, it's like 6. Anything less than 1,000 might you won't really see, but that's 5,000. So you can't drop the Gemini because you get the 5% prec might and vit, and you get the the Gemini buffs regardless. Soul Cloak is so you get your supercharges faster in the regen, and then so you have to take those 2. So basically that leaves you with like still running the solar amplifier, which isn't too bad. It brings you to 50,000, so you lose 3,000 might. 3,000 is still a lot, obviously, but you still help out. But then, like I said before, if I'm single target electric, yes, I use heat vision. But if I'm AoE electric, I don't use heat vision at all. So if I use a solar amplifier, that's pointless. I'm just wasting. I have a useless artifact. I'm using it just for the base might, and yeah, that's good. But if I have the stone at 200, I can run the stone. My might drops by like 300 might, which is hardly anything. But then I get all the supply drop buffs. So you're giving up. So then, yes, you'd have to have the stone leveled at 200. You have to have the solar amplifier at 160. And these at 200. So yeah, you're talking a lot of investment in XP just for different combinations. Or if you have the Grim still, it's not too bad either, because then you get 49, which is still you're still losing 4,000 might running that combination. But then you get the pet damage. The PI is useless for electric, polarized. So it just depends. If I'm quantum, then yeah, I'm going to need the Grim. Same thing with munitions, except the burning PI. Earth needs this for the single target for setting up crushed. Ice definitely needs it. Mental is helpful. Nature, kind of on the fence. It depends if you're using roar or not. Same thing as rage. Rage single target needs this, but the melee doesn't, so that you're in the same situation as electric. Atomic definitely needs this. Light needs this as well. So, you're in a tricky situation because you need the Grim, so you should get this at 200 because it's got the 5% prec and might. But then, do you run the stone because it's got the huge stats on it, or the Dead King? There's no easy answer. It all depends on your playstyle and what you want. What I'll be doing is tricky. I'm going to have the Gemini and the Soul Cloak on all my builds because I personally build my rotations around maximizing my supercharge damage and maximizing Gemini damage. But my third artifact, I'll probably, because I don't have the stone level, because I'm not gonna waste like 150, $160 to level that to 200 just for the odd DPSing. I'll survive without it. So I'll have the Grim at 200 probably in the solar. So then I might just run this, have some extra pet damage, lose the 2,000, 3,000 might, and have the pet damage. But then some people could have the solar amplifier. I'm probably not going to get that to 200 anyway because I don't think it's worth it. So I'll keep that at 160. So then I still get the 5% might, but then my might drops by about 900. So then I'll still be at the 49. So it's tricky. It honestly is tricky. In terms of controlling, it's much more easier. Like if you want a buff troll build, because the Tetra and the Cog work controller stance now, I would do like the Claw at 200, the Tetra at 160 if you're buffing might, or the Cog at 160 if you're buffing prec players, and then just run if you're doing prec players. Personally, the way I do a controller meta with my rotation, I would use the Parasite Harness because debuffs are debuffs. You can survive without debuffs. But if you prefer a debuff build and run the Amulet or the Parasite, these are fine at 160. Healers doesn't really matter, honestly. Demon Fang for stats. You're running the Orb. Obviously, you'd have to Gemini as a healer anyway. You could run the Philosopher's Stone. The healer ones, since there's not really any good healer artifacts, doesn't really matter. Prec DPS are always going to the Venom Dispenser. Prec DPS are always going to have the Grim, and they're probably going to end up with maybe the Stone because it's got the higher might, or they're probably leveled the Sparring Eye, so you get the 18% counter damage. They may do that still because that's the highest prec as well. So it's got the 1,115 prec, so does the Stone. Or they run the Cog buffs. Tanks. Nothing changes with tanks. Mystic Symbol of 7, Manacles of Force, and Gemini. Or Refractor. But honestly, with how powerful Gemini is, I would do this instead. Because you still get the supercharge regen as back to that kind of meta, back to using supercharges and such. So that's about it. I know I kind of didn't answer the question, but kind of answered at the same time, if that makes sense. But it's not an easy answer. There's no direct question. There's no direct answer to what are the best artifacts, quotation marks. But we can kind of continue this conversation in the comment section. I know this video is getting a bit long. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, take care.